We were definitely down the CRT rabbit hole.
And we're going to keep going. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a lengthy
Yeah.
rabbit hole. Okay. Um, so you yourself have said that you are supportive of critical race theory, that you're pro critical race theory, that you think it's a useful framework for thinking about things and for analyzing the world, given your sociological background. One of the things that I find is interesting is that, sociology doesn't need to necessarily include all of these theories. It's not like every school of sociology is practiced or endorsed by every sociologist. It would be insane to say something like that. But for your particular brand of leftism, I believe you call yourself a socialist, you agree that it's a useful framework. And I would say that more generally, you think that issues such as systemic racism, analysis of privilege, et cetera, these kinds of related ideas surrounding race are things that you endorse and that you think are useful. Um, I don't know
Yeah.
if we're going to I
know.
don't know if we're going to overcome the fundamental difference here in that um, in that assumption. But I want to say, sorry, before I let you respond here, I want to uh, I want to address this issue of the accusation that it's a Trojan horse. Okay, so you you said that a lot of the people on the right who engage with these ideas or are purportedly engaging with them are claiming that it's a Trojan horse for leftism more generally, for socialism or even communism on the extreme end. And my question to you is then, if it's not a Trojan horse, is it possible to uh, embrace or approve of critical race theory and related ideas without being a leftist?
Yeah, I think so. I'll just kind of restate the point that, like, yes, I'll be a defender of CRT, but that's only like a kind of position that I'm forced into as a leftist, having to defend the general
But why?
attacks on.
Why are you forced into it?
Well, because as I was trying to say earlier, like, I think it's a fine sort of subfield of academia, like hundreds of others. And with that said, they also have their shortcomings and their diminishing returns and inadequacies. So I don't want people to get the wrong idea that I'm like just a proponent, because I want to go beyond CRT. Right. This is the frustrating thing. Like, I might, have my own broad meta theory, of which CRT is like a very, very tiny part, like a few citations in an overall, work. But I want to go beyond. And it's lonely operating at a level of discourses and ideas that are ostensibly beyond some of these things, where we've already taken some of the assumptions of that prior work and its shortcomings, and try to synthesize it into a broader political program. Right. So at the end of the day, a lot of this politically does boil down to some of the basic antagonisms between left and right, or liberal and conservative, or left and liberal, for that matter. So, in the broad sense, like, I'm for universal education, and the world and the United programs of universal education does not have up to par public education systems. So the downstream effects of that is you get a public discourse that's not very rigorous, that's very, like, defensive and very strategic. And at the end of the day, like, the racism problem is like perennial. It just doesn't seem to go away, even if by certain metrics we can witness it diminishing. So yeah, that's just a frame. When a subfield is under attack, right? Like I said before, it could be any subfield: feminism, Marxism. There's a lot of misinterpretation. There's a lot of what I would call hate reading, which is I think what James Lindsay does. So it's evident from his book And it's evident from the critics who review the book that James Lindsay has done a lot of reading, and that he can craft an argument that's relatively persuasive. However, when you really get into the details, like you can start to pick apart like where it's just his motivations and his sort of agenda driving the project as a reaction to the left. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like just in this case, in this podcast, right? Like in conversations, I want to help create the space to talk about these things without entrenchment and all sorts of fallacies, but to and full disclosure, right? I'm barely qualified to do that because it takes all sorts of mediation and conflict resolution skills, and some of a lot of the people that do that don't have the requisite knowledge to mediate. So we're really at a loss, right? Like assuming we're both good faith actors, pursuing world peace and some sort of epistemic consistency and truth, we're really like not well equipped to do that.
Well, I will disagree with that characterization, but I would say that one of the things that I would be interested in potentially is trying to mediate a talk, maybe between yourself and a third party at some point in the future, just because I do agree that, we all have biases. We all have blind spots. You and I are both coming in with our own particular worldviews. And sometimes it can be helpful if you have a more or less disinterested individual who's witness to the conversation as well, who could sort of point out when one side is being unfair or one side is sort of reacting very emotionally and another. I think so far we've done a good job of traversing this conversation so far, but we are going to start to get into some of the details here. And there are some profound disagreements that you and I have. And so I don't want to leave those unacknowledged simply because we're worried about upsetting one another. And I'm not going to go out of my way to attack you or anything like that. But I do think we should start with some of those disagreements.